All right, welcome to another week of our lessons learned for our Security Awareness Manager community. I'm really excited this week to speak with Art K. And Art, would you please just introduce yourself, tell us a little more about you, and we'll get going talking about awareness for developers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. So, my name's Art. I am the CEO of Secure Web Solutions, which is a small consulting company that I run mostly nights and weekends, helping small startups build their MVPs and do pen tests and a variety of other things. But by day, I'm also a senior software engineer at Kentic, helping to build web applications. And
Okay,
yeah.
great. Well, I'm real excited about the conversation we're having today. We're focusing on security awareness specifically for the developer community. And this is something that you know a lot about, and you've even created a course around it. Let's just jump into it. What are some of the? I guess let's just start with what are some of the typical misperceptions or misconceptions people have with developers in general
Yeah. So,
in terms of awareness?
So developers are a fun bunch, and I can say that because I've been a developer for almost 20 years. And um, one of the things I've noticed about myself specifically, but also the vast majority of engineers who I interact with on any sort of regular basis throughout my career has been, you know, we are very technically minded, but
Mhm.
there aren't many formal avenues for pursuing security education at large, let alone just the important awareness factors that we would like folks to focus on a day-to-day or year-to-year basis when it comes to security awareness. But I mean, you look at other disciplines, for folks who work in the security industry, there are a million certifications that you can get. There's a CISSP, there's Security Plus, there's CCSP, there, the list goes on and on. There's dozens of them out there. And those are, somewhat of a mixed bag in terms of what you learn, how you learn it, who wants to focus on what specific areas. But the larger point is that they exist. And in the world of software engineering, those kinds of things really don't exist. There are not certifications for the most part around different technologies that you might be involved in. That's
Mhm.
starting to change a little bit with things like cloud. If you wanted to be AWS certified or Microsoft Azure
Right.
certified, uh, but even then, if you really want to focus on anything security specific, you really have to go down the rabbit hole and know what it is you want. And for most developers, they simply don't know what they want. They don't know what the options are, and there's no real career or learning path unless you want
Hmm.
to be a security architect.
Okay.
That an engineer can really follow. They're just sort of blindly, following blogs or social media posts, and they typically don't know where to go.
Right. That's really interesting. I didn't know that either. So basically, like you can be a developer. If you decide you're interested in security, then it's either a very specific course that they don't even know where to go yet if
Right.
they've just started, or they just, kind of dabble and hit and miss as they work on it themselves. That's a
Right.
lot of
Yeah, and to be more specific, so my expertise is in the area of building websites and web applications. And there's a great group known as OWASP who
Mhm.
creates a ton of content that's out there, and things like the OWASP top 10 are fairly popular. But even then, most developers who have heard of the OWASP top 10 can't really speak very deliberately about any specific attack vectors or specific things they might do to mitigate those attacks. So it really is a mixed bag in terms of who knows what and where do you go to find those resources, and are they even relevant to what it is you're doing day to day.
Yeah. So that's okay. So let's talk about it then from like a security awareness perspective, right?
Mhm.
So, as security managers, we know we have to create certain campaigns to different groups of people, right? To be
Right.
relevant to them where they're at. Since there's not a whole lot of content out there right now, what is the messaging? What are some of the highlights that awareness managers can kind of focus on for developers, especially if they don't have, that background as a developer themselves?
Sure, sure. So one thing that I've kind of taken on as like an engineering leader on my teams is to try to identify single and specific use cases for injecting security into a relevant part of the software development lifecycle. So as an example, like we talked about the OWASP top 10,
Mm-hmm.
it strikes me that instead of saying to the team, here's 10 things that you should know at a very high level,
Right.
you might flip that and say, well, let's focus on one thing and go really deep on that because it is specifically relevant to whatever my team might be doing. So that could be like cross-site scripting. It could be something else. But I find that engineers are much more interested in going deep on one thing rather than going very shallow on a lot of things. I think, you kind of get the, you get the sense that engineers are saying to themselves, well, I already know that because I've heard of the OWASP top 10 versus, all right, well, let's really talk about like how a specific kind of attack works. And then let's see if we can make it work in our environment. And then, keep going down that sort of thought train to really get somebody laser focused on learning one specific idea.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting insights, I think, because especially for that particular, group of people that you say they kind of have this tendency of really enjoying going deeper. So that's definitely something to consider in your programming, maybe even just doing quarterly, but going deep just on one topic each quarter and changing that. Because security is all about layering,
Yes.
You're not ever going to cover everything, but the more you do, no matter if you're focusing on a specific area, you are adding to that security. So that's really, that's really great insight.
Yeah.
We have Vishal is had a question.
Sure.
He was saying, could you please share some light on the restrictions that we put on safety measures like checking, tailgating, et cetera, in security? I'm not as techie, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to address that question specifically. So things like tailgating might be more of a physical security question than it would be more for the software engineering crowd that I would deal with specifically. So I don't know how to really address that question and make it relevant to this discussion.
So, well, let's go on to just kind of some examples. Do you have any like specific examples that you see as a common theme that more people aren't aware of, but could help, awareness managers in kind of where to tackle first?
Yeah. So, I'm going to keep harping on the OWASP top 10 just because it's near and dear to my heart. But you mentioned something a second ago about layering different approaches to learning a topic. And one of the items in the OWASP top 10 that I think is more relevant today than it's ever been would be things like broken access control, where if you have an application that has lots of users, in theory, the application should not allow user A to view things that user B owns, or some spin on that. But that's effectively what access control on an application is supposed to do. From an engineering perspective, it strikes me that many software engineers think that they understand how to mitigate those attacks. Okay, so as an example, if you're querying data from a database, you're trying to limit what the database gives back to you based on, let's say, the ID of the user who owns that data. Seems straightforward. But in order to kind of layer the security awareness in there, it has always seemed to me that it would be great for engineers to learn the offensive side of security. So, the OWASP 10 is all about the defensive side. This is what you should do to prevent this. But
Okay.
there's not always a lot of conversation about, well, why is this a problem? Or like, how does it become a problem? And so you
Right.
start learning the offensive side, maybe the things that like your pen testers would do or an auditor of some sort, where you can actually sit an engineer down and explain to them, well, here are some of the tools, here are some of the tactics that an adversary is going to be using against you. And let's see if we can't break that access control and gain access to another user's data. Those sorts of exercises, I feel like are very interesting to the engineering crowd. They're really quite eye-opening, I think, because people just don't think in terms of offensive security when you're writing code.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I think it has to do like I relate it to learning how to be cyber safe, right? Myself as
mhm,
just a regular user, I've had to become more situationally aware, right?
right,
Of the digital world, thinking, wait a minute, why are they asking me these questions? What are they trying to get out of it? And you're having
right,
to kind of spin your conversation the other way. So I see what you're saying.
right.
Like,
Mhm,
you've got to be able not just to be on the defensive, but you also have to think like an attacker so that you
sure.
can defend from the
Yeah.
attacker. I think that's a really great point, and it makes sense. Um, we have someone asking Liam, he's saying, apart from OWASP 10, do you have other resources to recommend to start building relevant developer security awareness training?
Mhm,
Um,
yeah.
Please.
So there is a lot of content that's out there. Some of it's free, some of it's paid. Shameless plug, I do offer an online course specifically to this area. Um, so the OWASP organization is really the gold standard when it comes to the availability of content in this area. Certainly, there's a
Okay.
lot of other companies that offer different kinds of online training. Some of them have things that we call like broken or vulnerable applications. So platforms like
Hmm.
Hack the Box or Try Hack Me are
Hmm.
fantastic for giving you that offensive mindset to learn how
Ah,
attacks happen, to learn what the tools and tactics are. Um, the OWASP group has a variety of these vulnerable applications, like I mentioned. One of which is called the OWASP Juice Shop. It's
okay.
a if you can imagine like an e-commerce platform. Think of something like a WordPress blog that sells anything. Um,
Uh-huh.
that's kind of what the juice shop is. It's a fake online store that sells juice, and
Okay.
it's deliberately vulnerable. So you were trying to hack your way into the system to abuse the different security controls that either do or do not exist. Um,
Hmm.
and so it kind of helps you to reverse engineer what those security controls should be. And then they have
Uh-huh.
other ones too. I think there's one called AWS GOAT, which is a similar idea for helping you better understand what your AWS environment can or should have in terms of security
Okay.
controls. So there's a lot of these different things out there, but yeah. So if it's not OWASP specifically, I'm definitely a big fan of Hack the Box and Try Hack Me.
Okay. So then that would be something of like as a manager, to just kind of provide those opportunities and let them know they exist.
Mhm.
Because, for me, I know Hack the Box as being just for like the cyber people, the people that want to just work on pen
Right.
testing. I wouldn't
Mhm.
have related it to developers just wanting to learn to, you know, be more aware of what, of training themselves.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
really great. I think that's a great resource. And to get back to your course, what I think is interesting, we were talking earlier about um, having to be not just defensive but offensive,
Mhm.
and your course focuses on both of those, right? You
It
kind of
does. Yeah.
merge the two ideas to help developers. So you can talk a little more about that.
Yeah. So the course kind of came about after a number of years of me sort of floundering, trying to figure out what it was I really wanted to specialize in on the web. Because after the first 10 or 12 years of my career, I was building websites left and right. I was building web applications, and I started to look at the different parts of the company that were around me and what those people were doing for ongoing education in their career. So folks who were in marketing were going to different conferences, and maybe they're getting certified in some of the marketing tools that existed.
Right.
Folks who were in security were always pursuing different certifications and things like that. And I would look around at my colleagues in the engineering space, and okay, some of the platforms, and Microsoft's probably the best example of this, where if you're a Microsoft.NET developer, there are certifications that you can get, but that assumes you want to go deep in the Microsoft.NET ecosystem. That's
Right.
just not where I was spending my time. And I wanted to learn more of these OWASP top 10 things because they seemed important. But when I was in college and talking to a lot of engineers who are now graduating from some of these like 6 or 12-week boot camps, none of them are talking about security. And as I mentioned, I had this cursory understanding of the OWASP top 10. I kind of knew what a cross-site scripting attack was. I kind of knew what some of these other things were, but I quickly learned the deeper I got into my learning around security that the things I thought I knew actually were very rudimentary at best. And
Okay.
so I started pushing myself to do things like hack the box. And after a few weeks and months of doing that, I was able to start talking to different colleagues that I had either at work or in the larger industry, and start having more conversations about like you realize if your code looks like X, then somebody could come in here and try to breach your defenses by doing X, Y, or Z. And it was always this really eye-opening conversation. So
Okay.
I just started collecting some of these questions and collecting some of these insights that I'd had from these conversations. And I put together this course thinking, well, if there's a way to make this more clear and uh, more useful than just pointing out a resource, where I can walk you through how an attacker thinks. I can walk you through how an attack happens, and then kind of have a hard stop and say, well, if your code did this thing, we would have been able to nip that attack in the bud. Um,
Okay.
that that really has I think opened some eyes to the people who I've talked to and the people who've taken my course, just to say, um, this is a way of thinking about software that most of us who were building the software never had to think about.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's definitely pushing you to really broaden. And I'm going to use my phrase now to use Gabby's, Wiser's founder. He also is a developer, and he says, secure code is quality code. It's strong
Mm-hmm.
and good code.
Yes,
So why wouldn't you want to have, better code? Why wouldn't you want to improve, the quality of what you're creating?
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So, it's just one more perspective on that. We have a question. We have a lot of great questions, but they're really specific on specific technical things that I just don't think we have the time to focus on. But I know you can reach out to Art afterwards, and I'm sure
Please.
he's open to
I love
directing you to get
questions.
some of those answers. But we do have one that's around just for security awareness from someone who's not technical. Um, do you recommend pre-built content or producing your own for specific, for the developer crowd? Um,
Pre-built or developing your own. Let me see if I understand the question here. Um, so I definitely think with the developer crowd, it probably depends on the specific team that you'd be looking to provide training to. So as an example,
mhm.
I mentioned that I am in the area of building websites and web applications. I'm not in the business, let's say, of building embedded software. I'm not writing C or C++ code. So the kinds of content I would recommend to a team like the one that I work on versus one of these other kinds of software teams, I think would be very different. And I think
Right.
in part working with the engineering managers should help to illuminate what kind of specific content should be out there, because there probably is some good off the shelf content that's available either on Pluralsight or Udemy or the variety of other platforms that exist to deliver content like this. I'm sure there's a bunch of it, but on the flip side, sometimes your team might just benefit from something more custom. Maybe you want to bring in an expert who can talk to the team for an hour over like a lunch and learn or a brown bag style presentation. Maybe you want to bring in a pen tester who can actually go through some kind of attack that's specific to the kind of software that your team is working on. Maybe your company's had a data breach, or maybe if you participate in something like a bug bounty program, having the researcher who identified a bug and bringing them in to talk to your team and talk through, why they were able to find something would be very illuminating for a software team, especially if they had to spend hours, days, or heaven forbid, weeks trying to plug something that was reported in the bug bounty. Those sorts of learning activities are way more impactful, let's say, than just doing the annual don't click on the link in your email training.
Right, for sure. And one other thing, with October and Security Awareness Month, you could use that to be a unique opportunity, right? To maybe even say, hey, take voluntary people to sign up for Hack the Box, right? And just make it kind of a friendly competition.
Sure.
And just see where it goes from there as well. Mark has a comment that I think is a really good, a good perspective. Let's see. Just a minute. It's a little long. I'm intimidated, Mark. All right. I said the idea around teaching developers the offensive side sounds good, but in practice, managers and security programs want quick wins. Right. Usually we're trying to do like micro content really is what's most effective in security awareness. That means they want to spend more time developing on the basics of on the basic understanding of the attack and then showing the options of how to defend against it. He said they tried the offensive mindset and it worked for about 10% of the devs. The rest just want to get quick wins. They don't want to become security experts. Any thoughts on how to get better buy-in? And I think it cut you off, Mark. So unfortunately, I don't know if I can see it all. Yeah, to get better buy-in. But we're going to leave it at that. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point too, where most developers, and it seems like you're pointing out the 90% case that they don't want to be security experts, and I think that that's fine. I don't think there's any expectation that providing security training will result in somebody becoming a security expert, or even giving them the idea that that's something that they might be interested in. Focusing on the basics is definitely something to do. But again, I think if we're talking about sending somebody a blog post to read about the OWASP top 10, or if you're going to ask your team to do a 30-minute video on some topic that you hope is going to be relevant, I suspect that time isn't as well spent as perhaps like I said, bringing somebody in just for a lunch and learn for an hour. Like you pay an expert to come demonstrate something that your team definitely won't have an expertise in, and you ask the presenter to relate that back to what are some of the basic defenses that might have prevented some attack. I feel pretty strongly, having interacted with as many engineers as I have, that if you can show an engineer how to reverse engineer their way into a system, they're going to be watching with full attention for at least 30 to 60 minutes. I mean, I don't know that you're realistically going to keep someone's attention longer than that who doesn't deliberately want to become an expert in security. But I
Right.
also think that that's okay. I think if you get 60 minutes, twice a year in somebody's ear, I think that'll go a long way to at least just, keeping the awareness factor there, whether or not it's a direct value add.
Well, I think something too, borrowing a little bit from the marketing department, when you are presented with a long form content, right, such as like maybe a 30-minute or 60-minute training, you can then take that content and break it down into micro content, right? And so that's something that you can then drip throughout the year, right? Like just this point, right? And kind of make a series of trainings out
Mm-hmm.
of that, that one time, so that okay, they've been exposed to it once, maybe they zoned out after the first 15 minutes or earlier, and
Mm-hmm.
but then they already have a context, you've set it up for them, and you can take the training now and just cut it up into small pieces and just put a thought out there, hey guys, did you check for this this month or
Right.
whatever, and just kind of reinforce in little short bite-sized pieces. I think that typically is also an effective way to utilize and kind of win-win situation for both crowds that want to go deep and crowds that just want those quick highlights.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, it's hard to do lunch and learns for several teams across different time zones.
It's true.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Online learning works, but it needs mentoring and structure.
Yeah,
So
that was
yeah,
actually a topic that I just posted something on LinkedIn about an hour or so ago. Was one of the things that I personally learned while I was leading a team a number of years ago was that as a manager of a group of engineers, you kind of have to decide whether or not that the career path or the professional education of your team members, is that their responsibility or is that your responsibility as their manager? And I always
right.
felt like it was imperative for me as the manager to say to my team, these are the things that you need to learn, and then also work with them to develop what it is they want to learn. But you can't just leave it to them, because for the most part, people will not prioritize their ongoing education unless they're completely disinterested in whatever they're working on. If they're interested in the tasks that you are giving them, they will typically prioritize that work, either because it's interesting or because they feel like they're getting paid to do it. And they'll keep pushing off education until it's, well beyond a reasonable time for them to have gone and looked at it.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, definitely, it can be, is it part of the culture, right? And that
Right.
you emphasize the importance. It just goes back to security awareness also, right? Where it's coming from the manager saying, no, this will make our product better.
Mm-hmm.
So we want you to take time for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you take every Friday for, this hour to this hour, this is learning
Yep.
time or whatever.
Yep.
And of course, it varies. And I think across the time zone issue, that goes back to, creating kind of your cyber champions, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and having those, kind of those team lead times, and then you disperse that out, and then they make it work for their time zones. It's not something that has to be, all inclusive all at once. Definitely. I know we had a question kind of wondering about, how is micro content efficient given the nature of the complex topics that developers deal with?
So I think it can be. I think another lesson that I learned leading teams a long time ago was, in order to keep the level of awareness of any topic at the top of mind, and that could be security, that could be a specific technical issue, that could be really whatever it is that's most relevant to your team. If you could just find 5 minutes once a week in your team stand up to say, hey, did you all hear about this?
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's like an actual piece of content that you want the team to discuss. You say, hey, in tomorrow's stand up, I want us to talk about this blog post or this video or like whatever it is.
Right.
And then you just make 5 minutes to get a reaction from the team. And I find that those 5-minute segments on a regular basis will create a culture where the team feels like, number one, it's obviously something that they should be thinking about. So they're actively noticing when they run into content like this, and then they share it with the team. And then, yeah, if there's an opportunity to go deep, that's great. But in terms of the regularity of just keeping it front and center on their minds, it doesn't have to be something that goes deep, so long as you're able to do it consistently.
Right. No, that's really great. I think that's really good insight. Mark, we are right at time. Do you have time for one more question?
I sure do. Yes.
Okay. So this one I thought was really interesting because typically, in the questions of how do you measure the outcomes of a security awareness program, typically from the other conversations I've had, it's usually about focusing on reporting, right? Your reporting increases.
Right.
But in this particular, focus, what would a successful program look like for developers and the KPIs that you'd be measuring?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. Some companies that are large enough or have been fortunate enough to embark in something like a bug bounty program, you could look at a reduction in the number of bounties paid or the number of dollars paid in the bounty could be a very important KPI there. Having said that, many companies are not involved in bug bounties, so that's not likely to be one that you all are going to jump and try to go do. I think maybe another way to look at this could be in terms of the standard engineering metrics that your team might already be measuring. Things like how many bugs are like reported by either the users of the application or wherever bugs might be coming from. You can see a reduction in the number of bugs. I think in the context of a program like this, because quality and security are very tightly intertwined, that would be a good KPI to keep an eye on. If you have a team that is actively encouraged to go and do training, like some companies offer individuals within the company like an annual training budget. Maybe it's $500, maybe it's $1,000, whatever it might be. You could measure to see how many of the engineers on the team are making use of that budget. Compare that to from prior to starting this kind of awareness campaign into then just 6 months after you start. And I am fairly certain that you would see an increase in the number of engineers who are looking or acting on using that budget to accomplish things like this. So I mean, you'll probably have to get a little creative to define some of these KPIs. It's definitely not as straightforward as
just those phishing reports.
Right, phishing reports, or you've taken some pre-canned content that's in the learning management tool that your company chose. It's not going to be as straightforward as that, but I also think your developers will be a lot happier.
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those things where it's improving because it's working, and it hasn't, like you said, if it's working like it should, then you've done a good job. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, especially in this specific target audience, that you're looking to focus on. That's a great question. So thank you so much. We'll go ahead and wrap it up now since we went a little over. Really great questions. Thank you to everyone who also participated. We have a security awareness meetup that we do weekly. Please DM me. I'm happy to send you the details. And you can also reach out to Art and connect with him on LinkedIn. Check out his course. We'll also be adding that in the recap that we do a little bit later also. so you can have those resources as well. So thank you so much, Art. Really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
It was.